Okay. So yes, as I mentioned, I will need to go into IM before going into cardiology. I took both step 1 and COMLEX level 1. Uh, to be honest, I'm not sure step 1 was needed, especially since it's pass or fail. I haven't applied yet, obviously, but I don't feel like, from talking to people around the hospitals where I've rotated and things like that, it doesn't seem like anyone pays a lot of attention to pass or fail step 1 anymore. So although I took it because, as we know, cardiology can be very competitive, I don't feel like it's a must for anyone. Evelyn, do you want to go?
Sure, I can go. I wasn't sure if we wanted to like open it up to questions to people first, or if we just should kind of give our spiel and then they can ask questions. But yeah, so I'm applying general surgery this cycle. Like I said, I'm a fourth year at MSU Com. Um, so personally for me, I took COMLEX level 1 and 2, and then I didn't take step 1. Um, I was having a rough time studying for COMLEX, and it just, with the timing of everything, it wasn't going to happen that I was going to actually have time to take it before I started my rotations. And I kind of honestly, like, I was like close to blowing a gasket. So I was just like, forget it. I remember it was a really rough time. I was talking to counselors at the time. And I don't know if how many people on this chat are from Com, but one of, I think Dawn was the one I would contact the most, and I was just talking with her, and she's like, look, like, it's fine, you passed level 1, like, you shouldn't worry too much, especially because it's going past fail. So I ended up skipping that, and then I actually ended up taking step 2 instead, this past year, because there was a score associated with it. That being said, I don't know. I won't know until match, probably, if I shot myself in the foot or not by not taking step, regardless if, I could have taken it with a score or just gotten a pass on it. But whatever, what's done is done. The interview cycle is going and it hasn't been awful. So that being said, I remember even earlier today, I was actually talking with Paula, and I was saying, like, taking step is I think it's such a personal choice. Like, at the end of the day, everybody's going to be different, and there's so many variables that go into it. Like, what specialty you're applying to. I guess what is it called? What specialty you're applying to, and then how good of a test taker you are too. Because I remember Dawn telling me at the time, you could take step 1, but if you do pretty bad on it, that might actually more in the foot than not taking it at all. So there's so many variables, and it's such a personal choice for everybody. You're gonna end up doing what's right for you at the end of the day. But that's just a little bit about what my situation was and what I ended up doing. Um, I also don't know how not having a step 1 associated, like, I have a step 2 score there, but there's no step 1. I don't know what was going through, I guess, like, programs' heads when they saw that. That's another thing I'm not really sure about. Like, they probably could have picked up my app and thought, oh, is it incomplete because I don't have a step 1 here? And they might have tossed it. I have no idea. But yeah, so that's just a little bit. I don't know if anyone has anything to add or any specific questions, but yeah.
I have a question for you, I guess. Maybe can help other people. I guess you talked about like the interview process. Did you apply to programs based off if they said on their like website that they required this and required that, or did you just like apply?
So I was really calculated. I went through all programs, and I went based off of whether or not they absolutely required a step 1 or not. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are really clear, and they'll just say straight up on their websites, like, we need a step 1 or else we're not going to look at your app. And if I knew that, I was like, I'm not wasting my money sending in an application here. That being said, there were some people that were like kind of vague with their wording, and I kind of just threw an app to their, in their direction anyway. So it kind of just depends, and it's kind of annoying. It was the worst part of applying, honestly, was like sifting through all these programs. Like, is this a place that's worth an application? Like, do I want to spend X amount of money sending it in? Are they even going to look at it? So, but yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if you really want to answer this, but did you apply to mainly general surgery programs that take DOs, or did you apply kind of everywhere?
I would say I applied mostly everywhere, but my big thing was mostly in Michigan. I have family here, my whole support system's here. I don't really want to leave. People kind of frightened me into applying like outside of the state, and I kind of wish I hadn't, because I don't really have any connections anywhere outside of Michigan. And I definitely wasted money on those. But yeah, as long as the program said that, you know, they were okay with just a COMLEX score, or they were okay with a step 2 in lieu of the step 1, I sent an app. So I didn't really look at whether it was, you know, like a DO hospital or not.
I can go next if no one else has questions.
Can I ask one last question? Have you started any interviews yet? Like, have you had any, like, did any of the schools like bring up like, hey, why don't you have a step 1, or is that something they asked? Okay.
Nope, no one brought it up. I think I would hope the schools that offered me interviews, or sorry, the programs that offered me interviews were, I mean, they realized what had happened, you know, on my app, and they're like, okay, makes sense. And then we're okay with it. Otherwise, if I didn't get an interview from them, I'm assuming it, you know, it wasn't a good match for their program, or they didn't like my app, or whatever the reasoning was. Or again, like I said, it always lingers in the back of my head. They were like unsure whether or not it was complete, because there was no step 1 but a step 2, and they were like, I don't know what to do with this. So I don't know. It's a risk.
I guess I'll add into that. I mean, if there's questions that the program has for during, you know, about your application, they'll just ask you during your interview.
Yeah.
So something that they might ask is how you came to the choice to take the second part and not the first part, you know, your pros and cons. Like it just depends on the program, I guess.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I applied family medicine, and I have like a lot of like what Evelyn said, I kind of have like second thoughts about that too. Like when it comes to where I applied, I did apply broadly. I'm from Florida. I live in Ohio right now. I was applying not because I wanted to go to Florida, just like whoever you have ties to, because like she said, you can be very like scared about like, you don't want to apply as many as you can instead of like the opposite. And I feel like I lost a lot of money when it came to that, because I didn't get like any interviews in Florida, which is fine. But I don't think I'm gonna like necessarily say it's because I didn't take step 1 or like however that may be. And when it comes to like my friends that both matched into EM, one of my friends took step 2. She's at OSU right now. And my other friend took step 1, but not step 2. And I think the only thing is like, the one thing I would say, with obviously I'm in primary care, it's not as competitive. Like, let's be frank, it's not like family medicine's not gonna be like a competitive field in comparison. So a lot of programs, even if that's the case, some programs did say on their website, like you need a step 1 or step 2 score. And like you said, some are very vague, like you need this, and they'll say, or COMLEX, or some are very vague. So I did look into that, but I know one of the hospitals here, I think it's Metro, and my friend had an audition there, and she was going to go and everything. And it was when she was there, they're like, oh, we'll let you go interview, but we won't rank you until you have a step 2 score. So that was the EM program. I'm not sure about any other things. So I would just be kind of like, if you know of anyone doing auditions, places you want to go, or in fields you want to go into, maybe ask that, because she literally just stopped doing her audition, because she's like, I'm not gonna, like, I'm wasting money like being in a different city. You won't rate me. I'm not taking step 2. But they both matched into EM. So what I will say is there's obviously a program going to be there for you. I mean, there's a lot of programs. So I didn't take step 2 or step 1. I never planned to, because I think it was always in conversation. I always knew I was going to do primary care. I'm not the best test taker. I'm not trying to add more to my plate. I'm not good at biochem. There's like so many reasons. I was just like, it was just never in my realm. And I think a lot of the advisors at my school would say like, no one can tell you what it's going to be, because the merger just happened, right? So as DOs, it was like, no one can really say you're not going to match because of this. And I think the advice was to certain people going to certain, specialties, they're like, but obviously, like you said, surgery, cardiologists, ones that they're like, you should just do it maybe to, be safe than sorry. And you will be going into maybe schools that they're MD heavy. So for me personally, I did look at schools. I looked at, race is important to me. So I looked at diversity. If I've never seen anyone of color for all these years, that stood out to me personally. Did someone say something? Oh, yeah, I was like, that stood out to me. And then I looked at DOs. If you never had a DO, like personally, that stands out to me because maybe I still applied to some, but it really wasn't like, oh, I want to go there, so that stood out to me. And then looking at the COMLEX score, I definitely, if someone said they wanted a step 1 or a step 2, it would just be wasting my money. So I didn't apply, but there's so many family med programs I applied to way more than I needed to. So maybe Evelyn, I don't know how many like surgical programs that like maybe you still apply to. So it's just very varies on your specialty. But long story short, I did not take both. I didn't have a problem getting the interviews that I wanted. And yeah, I think that's to speak to family medicine, I guess. And they never asked me, the other thing I will say, scores are obviously important, but no one's ever asked me about my scores, if that makes sense. Like maybe like, how did I improve or whatever, but it was never like, why'd you get this? Like, I think once you pass, it's true for certain, maybe like talking about family medicine, once you pass, I'm like, you got your interview, it's done. Like, so it's really a relief in that aspect.
I guess I'll go next. So honestly, I initially thought I was going to apply general surgery. And for just my experiences and then what I wanted to do, I ended up switching to IM with an interest in either a cardiology or a GI fellowship. So I was considering taking both of them. And I ended up only taking COMLEX because I took a practice exam for STEP and my projected score wouldn't have been beneficial. So I made the decision to not take it because if I didn't do well on it, I didn't want to send out an application with a bad score if I already have a feeling that it's not going to help me in any with interviews. And I guess I would say if you're trying to figure out whether or not you want to take both, is that I guess think about, does it serve the purpose that you want it to serve? Is it going to make you more competitive? Is it going to add anything to your application that you don't already have? And then, of course, like obviously your specialty that you're applying to is going to impact whether or not you take both, but also the institutions that you're applying to. Because if you're applying to these big, research heavy institutions, sometimes they may not formally say that they would like a step score, but if you're noticing that they have a lot of MDs and, that's who you're competing with. So, then they can kind of compare apples to apples versus, you having a different exam that the score has to be converted and they're not quite sure. Sometimes that can take that element of just a pause when they look at your application out, if it actually, if it helps.
And then I'm last. So I had decided to take both step 1 and 2, knowing that I wanted to move out of state to be with my family in Houston. And I knew also that PM&R was becoming more competitive each year. So I just wanted to give myself that advantage. And I knew also that I was decent at test taking. Scored like a little bit above average, which is pretty competitive for PM&R right now. So knowing all of that, I made the decision that I was going to take step 1, and I took it with a score. And then I also took step 2 just because I was thinking about getting interviews as a DO student from an out-of-state position. So, for me, I think it did work out well. I applied pretty narrowly. I would say your ties to whatever state really helps out too, though, because I didn't get any out-of-state interviews except for Texas because I had ties there. And then also Michigan interviews as well. Just for yeah, so just for like sake of me wanting to, and I knew where I was going, and then like it did provide, I think it did provide me some benefit with getting the auditions that I wanted as well. And it could be possible that it's like other aspects of my applications, but I think it was one of the things that probably stood out to people who filter out any students for auditions. But I have more to say. There's like a lot of politics involved with that as well. So that's where my standpoint is.
All right, though. Someone asked in the comments that when you say out of state, do you mean out of state from your medical school or where you're originally from?
Yeah, so out of state for my medical school, because I go to Michigan State. So, and I grew up in Michigan, so it would have been technically out of state for where I was applying.
Okay, and then the next question for you, Dao, is was your step 1 scored pass or fail?
It was not. So this was right before the switch. I took the exam and it was scored at the point, and that was intentional as well.
Why did you choose to do that?
So, like I said, I knew I had to be a little bit more competitive, and I chose to get a score because it did give me I knew a little, maybe like perhaps, and like maybe my unconsciousness or what like people's biases are, but I knew like programs do take it into consideration, even if they say they might be going to more holistic, and there are definitely programs who are making that decision. But if I had a score and I did, a little bit better than the rest of whoever else was applying in the same field, it did give me a little bit more of a break being a DO student.
All right, thank you. And then for all the panelists, someone asked, how different do the exams feel? They should cover the same content with exception of OMM topics, correct?
So I don't know. This is funny because I literally, after I take these exams, I block them from my head because it's like PTSD, I feel like. But I feel like it's the same content in theory. Yes, that is correct. But I feel like they're just so wildly different sometimes. And it's irritating as all hell. I'm so sorry. Like you can sit for, COMLEX, and I swear sometimes, you kind of almost just go into autopilot mode when you're taking these exams. But I just remember like looking back after I'd finished it and being like, those were like, you guys know COMLEX, and I think you've taken COMATs at this point, like, the style of questions from them. They're not good at the end of the day. And sometimes they're tricky for no reason, like it's just because of the way they word it or the way they write the question in the exam. And you're just, that's just my hot take, but whatever. Versus, STEP, it's a little bit more specific, and sometimes it's just hard because it's hard. Like they're asking a detailed question that you're like, oh my god, I've read this maybe once during like second year pre-clerkship, like stuff. Like, so I mean, they're different. Yes, it's the same content, but you have to get used to the testing style for each. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, yeah, you could do them back to back, and I couldn't. I definitely could not. I had to like prep myself and be like, all right, it's time to switch gears and focus on this style of question. So
I agree. They do feel very different, even though it's similar concepts. I feel like what COMLEX does do, though, is that they'll slip in OMM stuff on questions that aren't really relevant to it. Like they'll give you random findings that actually don't help you with the answer. And sometimes it can throw you off because you think that they're trying to get you to answer one way, but it's really more of a medical based question as opposed to an osteopathic based question. And then, yeah, it is a different feel to it for sure.
The stems are longer too. I personally didn't take it, but I know from UWorld and just people that took STEP, like the stems are that long in UWorld. And every time, even if I did some UWorld questions, I'm like, COMLEX won't be that long. It's okay. But it really is, I mean, like what I echo what you guys said, is kind of like you learn the test. You're almost like, I know what you're trying to do. Like it's not that simple, but sometimes it is that simple. And it is autopilot. I remember just being at the end of the test, like, or, you know, just clicking away. And I'm like, I don't even really care. Like I care, but I'm like, I'm just like, I don't know, man. C, B, I don't know. I want to be done. It's like 7 hours. Like it's crazy how you really just are like sitting there and you're just going, but you're like not really there. It's wild, but everyone will make it exactly where you're supposed to be at the end of the day.
To give you an idea of how variable COMLEX can be, I scored 491 on level 1 and then 730 on level 2. And I'm pretty sure I use very similar methods and resources. So it's a little bit of an indication of how bizarre the scoring system can be. I think some of it is mindset as well. I know a lot of students who weren't able to pass the first round because it was more of a anxiety, or just, I mean, it gives me anxiety as well, but a lot of it too is like just, you have to have some confidence, even if it's false confidence, that you're gonna pass. And going into level 1, I was definitely more anxious. And I wasn't like in the really good mindset. And then of course, like the electricity went out during that exam. But I would say the structures of the tests are quite different, because for me, at least, my level exams, they were like 2 words, and you had to like assume from like one keyword what, you know, the answer would be. And for STEP, it was more of like, I could still do it systematically. I could just read the last sentence and then kind of predict like what kind of information I need. And it's very like textbook in that way, where you can know for certain that you've probably seen it before. Whereas level 1, it was just like random, like some of it was totally random, and some of it I knew for sure what it was.
There's no biochem, right? On step, like on the step exams I've heard. That's when I'm going through first aid. It's like, COMLEX is not going to go in this depth. I'm not going to do that. But I've heard that for step, you may have to go into more detail.
Yeah, there's definitely more details, more of that biochem or pathophys. And then some of it, they like to, there's like definitely stats and things like that. Whereas COMLEX, there was random laws and regulations as well. From what I remember, I was just like, I know some of this from class, but some of it just honestly is just random words put together.
Yeah, random stuff about insurance as well. Like what type of Medicare?
I had one of those actually, and as everybody already said, you know, we're just beating a dead horse at this point. COMLEX is just way more confusing. You don't even know what they're getting to. You don't know why half the information is there. You don't even, some of those questions, I feel like I wasn't even getting exactly what they were asking, because the whole thing was so confusing and it burns you out so much. I remember by 1 p.m. that day, I was like, I'm so over this. Versus at the end of my step, I was able to look back and be like, okay, you know, this block went kind of this, you know, went kind of good, or that block went kind of bad. But COMLEX is just so, it's numbing. It's just too much going on. It's too confusing and you feel ill prepared. I felt like all the resources I used, everything I read, everything I watched, it didn't exactly prepare me for that. It's weird. It's very weird. So good luck to you.
It looks like someone asked whether you should take STEP or COMLEX first. For my experience, taking STEP first was helpful. And maybe it was just from my bias for my scores, but from like the first versus step 2. So when I was able to study just for STEP, I felt like I was able to grasp the concepts and like actually learn the content. And then when I then went into, because my first one I did level first, And then I took step 1, and then for step 2, I took that one first. And I preferred the order of taking step first, just because I got all of did all the understanding, and I was able to mentally prepare myself for step. And then when I went into level, I just had to add on the OMM. Where when I did it opposite, I felt like I was losing some of the concepts when I was learning OMM, because it is a lot to remember for the OMM part.
Mhm.
I agree. I didn't take both, obviously, but I know people that did. And something that is important to consider is that, so the COMLEX, like, that's the one that you actually need to graduate. So some people who took COMLEX first and they had too much space between that and STEP, they ended up canceling that STEP exam because they got like mentally fatigued. So sometimes you might need that extra push to make sure you actually study for both.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would say, oh, so Amanda, did you want to say? Okay.
No, you're
Okay. I was gonna say, I think that's something that kind of ruined my studying the first time around for level 1 and step 1. I was almost kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, like trying to study for both at the same time, and then it ended up just all getting jacked up in my head, honestly, which was, it was so stupid. But I think what I changed when it came for level 2 and step 2 is I was studying for step as if I was gonna take step first, but because then I was like able to focus on the concepts without worrying about a lot of the COMLEX stuff. But then I ended up taking level 2 first and then step 2. I just, that last, like, I would say probably 2-3 weeks before the exam, I just tossed in all that OMM crap. The other thing too, for the reasoning to take level 2 before step 2, or level 1 before step 1, was I just wanted to like empty my brain of everything OMM. Like I wanted to like feel like I'm done with that for now, and I can just like flush it down the toilet. Like I know that's so bad. I hate OMM, guys. So like if you like it, I'm so sorry, but like I just wanted nothing to do with it anymore. But for sure, I think I don't know, it depends. I know a lot of people that got also, like Kelly was saying, burnt out and were like, I don't want to step anymore. Like I don't need it. After they took level 1 or level 2. So I mean, I don't know. You got to kind of know yourself, and sometimes you live and you learn. And in my case, I learned very quickly that what I did for level 1 and step 1 was not working. But yeah, it's just my hot take, I guess.
But when you say, I hate that you hate OMM, but I mean, I think we all hate studying for it, but I want to be better. But I mean, I always was like mediocre getting by in school with OMM. But when you think of it, it always brought me comfort that we have that little cushion, because you can, do the tender points, you can do the Chapman's points, all those stuff. And like, oh, I heard there's like 10 visceral somatic. So you are kind of like, you can't say that for step, right? So at least going in, there's certain things that you can just memorize and you'll know. I have heard too, I don't know like a personal case, but I think some people, if you don't know how you study, like me personally, if I go back, I wasn't like that sketchy URO person. I wish I was, but I wasn't me. And my life would have been a lot easier if I probably started that year 1. But people that did that, they probably were really successful and scored really high. But I think people that started to maybe try to use URO stuff, like step stuff, for studying for COMLEX, it could have bit them in the or shot them in the foot if they don't know themselves like how to study. Because I think for me, if I was trying to do URO, I had to tell myself I'm studying for a DO test. Like Kelly, Dr. Parker, like she said, like, you're studying. So when my friend would start getting, you get antsy when you don't have something solidified, you start saying, oh, my friends are doing URO and then I'm doing ComQuest and they're doing ComBank. And it's this whole thing. You start trying to do all these banks. And then what you're going to do is not be prepared for that one test you actually need, like she said, to graduate. So I think for number 1, make sure you're going to pass and do well with ComLex, because at the end of the day, that is what you need to graduate. And that is, you're going to be a DO. And I think the other stuff is extra, and you could decide not to take step. You can't decide not to take COMLEX. So I think that's one thing that I realized just with like talking to my friend. I'm like, you're studying for COMLEX, and I had to keep reminding her, like, do not switch to URO. You haven't even done this yet. And it is a different test. Like once you take the test, I don't know about anyone else. After you take level 1, it's almost like you trust the banks. Like I almost was like, what if they ask me this? I don't know. I just never trust when I studied for the first time. I didn't know what to expect. So the second time around, I felt more comfortable doing a question bank and trusting that they were preparing me, if that makes sense. It was just very hard to take level 1, not knowing what I'm walking into, even though you just never know. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
So before we come back to the board stuff, somebody asked a question about applying, and I feel like we need to get that addressed first. The person asked, how can we properly ask programs whether we actually need step 1? Can we email programs of interest to ask? If we do email them, is there a possibility that they will view it negatively or perceive it as us not wanting to do the work?
It's all about how you phrase it. So just ask, what are your thoughts on step 1? How do you think your program will use those scores? I think it's totally fair. I mean, those program directors are supposed to be transparent. And if they're not, then there's probably an indication about why the program is like that. I think they won't label you as that. I think they'll just say like, oh, this person just wants to understand my program more. They just want to, be able to connect with my program. They're smart for asking those questions.
I'll also add, just in general, for like talking with programs, directors, faculty, all that good stuff, take it with a grain of salt. They're supposed to be transparent, and I mean, in an ideal world, they would be transparent, but just because they say you're their top choice or, it's this or that, does not mean anything when it comes down to match. Like there are some people where they'll just straight up say like, oh, you're our top choice or you're this or that. And then you end up, you're not at that program. So it's, I feel like you should get the information that you need, ask, but just know that sometimes they're not always the most honest.
Yeah, I think the operative word that both Kelly and Dab both used here is supposed to be. They're always supposed to be, but they aren't always very transparent, unfortunately. I even like personal anecdote, not me personally, but a friend of mine, who is a general resident. Oh crap, what is this? She sorry, I'm on my phone and I'm like getting calls now. There we go. She was telling me about a program that I was interested in, and more or less she was like, yeah, I auditioned there. And then they were gassing me up like the entire time after the audition, like, oh, you're such a great auditioner and like great applicant and this and that, all of this. Telling her how much they, would love to rank her. And long story short, she's a DO. The program isn't necessarily known to be the most DO friendly. She ranked them and as number 1 and then didn't match there. So, and then I actually heard another resident who chimed in was like, oh, that happened to me too, same program. So you have to take everything these people say with a grain of salt. That being said, if you want to reach out in terms of like, finding out if the program would prefer if you have, a certain score like step, or not, you can. I just feel like if it's a program that's worth your time, they're going to have it listed on their website anyway. And maybe that's just me being a hard ass, but like there's so many, like it doesn't take very much to like type a bullet on your website and be like, we accept both. Like it will probably it's free. Like it's free and it takes 30 seconds. If it's worth, your time, then they'll have it listed on the damn website. But these people like to make money and an app is a way to do that. So if they can milk more apps from, a class, then why wouldn't they? But
Yeah, I just want to add that although I haven't applied yet, I think a good way would always be like, hey, what would make an applicant competitive for your program, or what are some of the application aspects that you value in your, I guess, selection? I don't know, things like that maybe. That's what I use for med school applications. So I don't know if it works for residency, but just an advice, a suggestion, I guess. Okay, now coming back to the board stuff. So somebody made the the comment that I think power going out during COMLEX beats our bomb threat during exam 3 anatomy practical. Didn't know it was possible to beat. But yeah, I feel like they're kind of at the same level. No, actually, power outage during an exam is actually a lot, but yeah. And somebody asked, how much space would you recommend between the 2 exams? I'm going to give you guys 2 questions at a time. Somebody asked that, and somebody also asked, when did you guys officially start studying for either exams?
So in between step 2 and level 2, I think it was, I want to say it was like 2.5 weeks, something like that. It was just enough time to make sure I could like cement OMM in, honestly. And I don't know, like for me, it's really easy to just quickly memorize like I do not go full into OMM. It's not worth my time. I just memorize the quick and dirty, like that I know is gonna be Kelly's laughing. I memorize the quick and dirty stuff that I know is gonna get me points, and that's it. Like I'm not here to study the theory of OMM. God, that's horrible. But if I know it's going to be on the quiz, because you know what's usually going to, or on the, sorry, not on the quiz, on the exam, you know what they test heavily on usually with OMM. So just the quick stuff I can commit to memory, and then like anything that's really easy to remember usually. And at about 2.5 weeks, I was plenty of time. It was fine. But then in terms of studying, when I started studying for both of them, oh gosh, I don't even think I want to say I gave myself, I don't remember for level 1. That time was such a blur, but I think for level 2 it was around 2 months. I think that I was trying to revamp a lot of the way I studied, because I was doing it incorrectly for level 1. Like it was just bad study habits and I didn't know what I was doing. So it was kind of like, I don't want to say starting from scratch, but coming up with a better system the second time around. So I think it was about 2 months, and I had scheduled like an online rotation during one of like the first month that was like super chill and easy. So I had that time to do that. So
Can I ask a question? Piggyback. I can't say the word, but basically going off of what you just said.
Good.
Can you maybe give us, like, if it's not too personal, 1 or 2 things that you wish you would have fixed? Like you said, you had made mistakes while studying for step 1.
Yeah. So I touched a little bit on it with like the trying to study for both exams at the same time the first time around. Don't do that. Just focus on one, and a lot of the content should carry over. The other thing too is, actually Amanda touched on it a little bit, was the content overload. Like I would get so caught up in like, oh, this person's doing this, question bank, and this person's using this book and this podcast. And I was like, oh my God, like by the end of it, I had like 14 resources in front of me. I think I barely skimmed the surface on any of them. And I was just like, okay, great. I learned absolutely nothing here. So don't overload yourself. Figure out what works for you quickly. And sometimes you have to be kind of introspective, or like sit down with yourself and be like, I know this works, I know this doesn't. And just focus on like 2 or 3 resources. I even think 3 is too many. I used 2 by the time level 2 and step 2 rolled around, like a question bank and some other form of review, whether it's a book or a podcast, or like, boards and beyond type videos and stuff. Just focus on those 2 and like see them through like all the way to the end. That's something that really like kicked me in the ass the first time around. And then otherwise too, I'm also very much easily distractible. So like I had to learn like to study maybe not around my friends all the time the second time around, because it was so easy to be like, oh, I'm gonna study for 30 minutes. I'm bored now. Like let's chit chat, whatever. Like you can't do that. And I'm just an idiot, I'll be honest. But yeah, it's just like little things like that. But I think the biggest one is don't do that resource overload bullshit. It will kill you. And then you just feel like you didn't learn anything. So
Thank you.
I agree. Definitely do not overdo it on the resources. I gave myself about like I don't know, 4-ish months to study, because I even moved my date back, because when I was studying for at least level 1, that was when we first went to lockdown. So there was a lot emotionally going on, and I knew like I'm not in the right mindset to do it. And then for the second one, I gave myself about that amount of time, just because in the middle of studying, I kind of realized, oh, I really should have studied for this differently. And so I ended up doing that, and it paid off. I did better on that second one. So yeah, it does depend on how much time that you feel you need.
Yes, I totally agree. Again, just to repeat, don't overload yourself with resources. And if you can, try not to pay attention to your friends, because everyone's going to be everywhere. You're going to feel like you have the greatest imposter syndrome. You're way behind. Just stick to what your plan was. You can share information before you start dedicated, but once it gets to dedicated, you got to be structured about it, because at least for people who get anxiety when you talk about these kind of things, which was me. And then for timing wise, I took 9 weeks for my level 1 and step 1. And then I took 5 weeks for step 2 and level 2.
I'll add something real quick about stay off Reddit. Please stay off of Reddit. I think we're all, it's helpful because they're like, know this bug and know this was on my test. It was so heavy in this. And then you're like, oh, I gotta go do this. And then that gets you off track. And even, I mean, I don't know, if we really do statistics, what, like maybe go on Reddit, give me one question, maybe, so it's kind of like, you can go down a rabbit hole. And then you start feeling incompetent, you start feeling scared because you were doing fine. And now you distracted yourself. It's really a rabbit hole. You're still probably going to go on it. I just have to say it just because I have to say it, but it really is. And then you like are searching for someone to tell you something you don't know, which is like ironic when you think of it. But so I would say stay off Reddit. I think we all would love to take that advice. And I think most people in my school, or people were saying like, oh, during spring break, I guess that's March, like this is when I was going to start. And even though, like I said, I was never that sketchy URO person. So if you did sketchy earlier, good for you, because COMLEX has a lot of the main bugs, like the very main, like 4 bugs they asked about a million times, which is so irritating. So I think it always was like, oh my God, like what if I did do that earlier? So in that time, I was wasting a lot of time watching sketchy over and over, when that was a passive learning. So I would say do active learning, which is do a lot of practice questions. You're going to see stuff repeat a million times just because you've done so many questions. But I was doing a lot of passive learning. Oh, let me go watch this video. Let me go watch Boards and Beyond. And I don't learn that way, but it's getting caught in your like habits. So whatever habits that you have, if you're like passive like me, and that's not how you learn, I would say to start, building like healthy habits that stick for sure.
Right. I will add that the things that you have to be at peace with, like first, what Amanda mentioned, you're not going to know what's going to be on your exam from anyone. Someone is going to take an exam today and you think, oh, tomorrow, because I have my exam and they said that your exam had a lot of micro in it, then mine will have a lot of micro in it. No, that's not going to happen. Like I talked to Amanda before taking my COMLEX, and then when I took it, it was nothing like what she told me she had, and it was nothing like what I was reading on Reddit a few days before it. As a matter of fact, the day after taking my exam, I felt so terrible about it that I went on Reddit and I was like, what the heck just happened? And I was like, what happened? Like, did the same thing happen to all of us? And then some people were like, oh, that was so easy. They asked the main things that everybody always says they're gonna ask. And I was like, well, okay, good for you, I guess. And then there were also some other people like me who were like, yeah, they asked this and that, not even the same stuff they asked me, but they have different forms, so we can all have very different experiences. And then the second thing you have to be comfortable with is knowing that you're not gonna know everything. You're gonna go somewhere or hear somebody say, oh, they always ask these, so you should also know that. If you don't have time, hey, focus on the high yield stuff. That's what I did. I started by studying, I studied system wise, and I studied the high yield system first, and I made sure I had them down. And then I went into my COMLEX and my STEP without having studied too much of biochem, because I was like, hey, those 3 biochem questions, I don't care. Let's even say 10 biochem questions, I don't care. There's going to be a lot of MSK and things like that. So I'll focus more on that because I didn't have time. Now coming to the question time, to the time question, I mean, I really started studying about a month and a half before, only because my school gave us 3 months and I spent like a month and a half just figuring out what works for me. And somewhere on the month and a half mark, I restarted from scratch because I realized, okay, I'm 6 weeks into this. I'm still doing very well, not very poorly, but I'm still nowhere near satisfied with my U-word score, and I don't feel like I remember much, and I don't feel like I know what I'm doing. So I had to start over. So yeah, I would say a good way to know if you're doing the right thing is choose whatever question bank works for you and then do the questions. And if you feel like even after studying something very seriously for, let's say, 3 days, you studied like 5 chapters or whatever, and you're like, I still cannot pass a certain level on my U-word, I feel like that can be a sign that, okay, you need to change something here. You're clearly doing something wrong. Because after I changed the way I studied, I did notice an improvement. Like even the way they would ask me, I'll be like, oh yeah, I remember this, I remember that, versus the way I was studying before, I couldn't remember things. I was like, yeah, I know I read this, but I don't remember the details that would help me answer the question. And so we have 5 minutes left, so I'm just gonna pretty much read all the questions that are left, and if we can tackle them, then great. Somebody did you guys end up doing U-word questions? If not, what questions bank did you use? I'll say yes, I did U-word questions, and then somebody else would answer. I'm just shooting it out, and then I'll open it to everyone. And then somebody asked, how did you treat your dedicated period? Like, how long was it, and what exactly did you do day to day? And let me see. Okay, yeah. And then I would start that one off, I guess. So when I just started, I was reading first aid and answering questions and annotating first aid and doing all that. And I was very careful. Like I was very meticulous, made sure I took notes, blah, blah, blah. I went through the whole first aid thing. I started with neuro, did it twice, did the U-word questions, and I was still not getting good grades. So I had to start over using Anki. Anki is what I used, in pre-club, and it actually worked so well for me. I was scoring much better than before. So that's how I knew it just wasn't, Anki is what works for me and not just reading first aid. And besides that, I also watch Pathoma videos. So I just use first aid, Pathoma, and U-word. That's it.
I also use those resources. And I said like a lot of it you do before dedicated. But I especially like the MBME forms. So I use that to trend my scores. And I took one right before going into dedicated, and I just like would take one every week or so. And there's some information out there about like what order you take and whatever, but I think they're generally pretty predictive. Probably not as much as UWorld assessments 1 and 2, but they're still pretty good for keeping you on track. But I would also just caveat that I would also take it as a grain of salt sometimes if your score dips, because I had that happen to me with step 2, where I like lost 4 points the next exam and I knew I just was like burnt out. So consider that too. But I, eventually like what my results were what I was content with.
So wait, I'm trying to remember. Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. What am I answering again?
What
So-
resources like you were like cubing?
Yeah, I was like, because I'm thinking of all of them. So in terms of question banks, UWorld all the way, especially because of content review. So my way of studying is answering questions and then going back and looking at the explanations. Those are so huge for me. And unfortunately, like no other question bank really can like go into detail and like explain why you got something wrong like UWorld. I used a little bit of like TrueLearn and stuff because the school gave it to us just to get in the feel of like what the questions on level 2 and 1 are like. But in terms of content review, UBank or UWorld all the way is the best question bank, hands down. And then in terms of like just reviewing content, like if I knew there was a subject I was weak on or a system I was weak on, for level 1, I was like, this is where I went wrong. I was mixing all these things together and none of them, like, because I was trying to do everything at once, it wasn't working. By the time I got to level 2, I had discovered the Divine Intervention podcasts. And I don't know why, but listening to him was way more tolerable than listening to Boards and Beyond or any of the other ones. And I really liked his too, because kind of like what Amanda was saying with the passive learning stuff, I tried just like reading verbatim, like first aid. That didn't work the first time around. So with Divine Intervention, I was able to like play the podcast, like kind of almost write and take notes while the podcast was playing. And sometimes depending on the podcast, he'll like include questions in there. So like being able to pause, try to answer his question, and then he goes over it after, like that's more like I was more actively participating with the content. So those were really big for me the second time around, the podcast and then UWorld, obviously. But
And I'm not sure how other people did it here, but I know some people say they redo their missed ones, but to me, I always personally thought like you can miss something by accident, you can get something wrong by accident. So I always like to mark it myself, because then if I go through a bank and I have a mark, if I have like, if there's 2,000 something, and if I have like 600 marked, if I go through my mark, at least I know like I need to go through this again. But you can get lost in the sauce of like, did I know that? Oh yeah, I knew that. And you tell yourself you did, so I personally, but I think a lot of people that take step 1, I think they redo their missed, like if they go do a second pass. But I would recommend marking yourself because it keeps track of, it's really hard to get back to like what you really want to review. And it's hard not to get caught up. If you are on one question for like 2 hours, you need to move on because you do need to hit your like goal every day. And it's easy to just be like, oh, let me go watch this video, let me go do this. And now you still have a lot of questions to review. So I would recommend marking in the question banks you use.
And I mostly
sorry.
UWorld. No, you're fine. I just mostly used UWorld for the question bank, and then for content, it was kind of just Anki and Sketchy to help me kind of remember those things that I just could not remember.
Do you know what the new form is called? Does anyone remember? It's not the what are they called? Like the practice tests? COMSAs. They're COMSAs.
Oh.
You can buy COMSAs, but there's another thing. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like you can buy the forms. They're not indicative. They're very easy. I don't know if anyone bought them. I did, but that was just to be like, hey, I need to buy every resource that my school recommended I did. Welcomes. They're called Welcomes. Those are not like what she mentioned. Those are not MBOME tests. So I would recommend what she said, like the step 1, because those are very like, I don't know. They're good to review just for content, but it's not like a test of where you are, I wouldn't say.
Okay. All right, so it's 6:01 p.m. Hopefully we answered at least most of the questions here. And also I mentioned in the group chat that back in November, SNME Region 5 hosted a meeting like this to talk specifically about COMLEX versus USMLE 1, and different students talked about their study techniques and what they recommend and all that kind of things. So a recording would be shared to our YouTube channel, SNME Region 5, all caps. And yes, if you have more questions, I'm sure that is going to answer your questions because a lot of students found that helpful. So, all right, thank you everybody for coming today. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope this was helpful. Thank you to our panelists for agreeing to do this and, sharing their wisdom, I guess. So I guess good night, everyone, and good luck on your exams.
Thanks for hosting this. You're making a difference. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.